Why are we looking at human origins to understand modern man, modern humanity, and story, mythos or myth, ritualized storytelling? We have dance, we've got myths, we've got rituals, we've got the rhythms of our meals as modern people, as modern human beings. And these rituals and myths and meal rhythms have been developing over tens of thousands and really hundreds of thousands of years by our ancestors. And we can just chuck all that development, but we do so at our peril. And we need to build into them and take advantage of them. It's folly to think that we can just like dispense with our myths and rituals and our coming of age rituals, the quinceañera, or the things for young men and young women to mark their entry into adulthood, or rituals for marriage, rituals for death, rituals for birth, the annual festivals. Like, these things are part of how we stay sane and thrive as human beings. And I think one of the reasons we're having this meaning crisis is we've just thought, oh, those things are all kind of irrational, so we can just kind of get rid of them because they're not really needed anymore. And we'll just abstractly figure out how to set up our ideal society, a little utopia. And, they tried this in the Soviet Union with the perfect equality, and we'll just get rid of social class. We'll just get rid of that. We don't need that. We'll just restructure the family and raise the kids in this boarding house, and like their parents don't need to see them. No, that didn't work. It lasted 75 years, and even many of those experiments did not even last that long before it completely collapsed into a crumble of nothing. And we're in the West, and I'm in the United States, where we have our own kind of version of that, where we've kind of abstractly thought, like, oh, we'll just set up society this way with our suburbs and our big car culture, and live kind of isolated and live without these ritualized myths. And it's leading to this same meaning crisis. And we need to get back to the ritualized stories, the myths, the books, ultimately, I think. But that includes like embodied dance with old people and young people, and the extended family and the neighborhood and the festival, these things that people have had for tens and tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years probably. And David Reich wrote this book, and I have it somewhere here, but I can't find it right now, called Who We Are and How We Got Here: Ancient DNA and the New Science of the Human Past. And I'm just getting into the book now, but it's how looking at the science of our DNA allows us to see how our ancestors were. We can't see it in detail, although there's some details that we can see. But anyway, we get a pretty good picture of tens of thousands of years ago, really, and then getting to hundreds and millions of years ago, our deeper ancestors, and how we can learn from them what we are today, and what we're like. We can look at the genomes. I mean, I don't know much about genomes, but I'm reading this book. But there's occasionally a difference which marks a mutation in this whole group of billions of chemicals in the genome. And when there's a high density of differences, there was an event. And that might have been the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, when technology with stone tools really was revolutionized and like created a whole slew of new types of tools. And you see these beads made of ostrich eggs, shells, and cave paintings and figurines that really helped shape who we are today. And so we're going to get into a little bit of that. I'm going to continue talking about Robert Bellah, and how he's helping me think about these things, and how child development, like how a child develops from young to adolescent and so forth, we can see these developments in the psychology of the child echoed, or anyway, they correspond to the development of culture. And we talked about this last time, the inactive mimetic representing, where it's kind of this ritual, this kind of imitative, this kind of mimesis. I'm imitating, um, like a baptism, a kind of putting somebody in water and then taking them out, like a kind of death and resurrection in a ritual. Or there's symbolic, mythic, or narrative representing. That's storytelling. And sometimes these rituals and myths are mixed. It's a ritualized myth many times. But these are these myths, whether that's the myths about the gods and the structure of the universe, and the stories about the beginning of the world, from the ancient Romans and the Greeks, or the ancient Jews. And then you get to the third level, which is the conceptual, theoretic, or propositional level, the rational level, which is great and has gained us so much progress in society over the centuries. And we want to hold on to that progress and that theory and that propositional knowing. But we need to keep going back to the ritualized knowing and the mimetic knowing and the mythic knowing. This is maybe the key error of the modern human, is the thought, the mistaken thought, that because I have theory, because I have propositional knowing, I can just dispense with mythos and mimesis and ritualized myth and storytelling, and work abstractly, and dispense with embodied knowing. And Bella, he talks about practices. So there's practices and there's rituals. There's the things that we kind of do on a daily basis, like driving a car or playing chess. He gives these examples. And he says that in such cases, this is Bella, in such cases, the experienced practitioner knows instinctively what to do in challenging situations. Critical thinking at such moments could only disrupt the flow and produce serious mistakes. And so take, for example, driving. I just drove here, and I kind of do it without thinking, because I've got this embodied knowledge, and I don't have to explicitly spell it out and think, turn 30 degrees in this direction slowly, but then speed up. No, I just kind of do it. I'll get in the flow, and my body and my mind are working together. And obviously, if you get totally unconscious, then you can crash, and that's not good. But I can't totally overthink things, otherwise I will crash as well. And if I'm playing chess, and I'm not a very good chess player, but I was hearing this guy talking about how he played chess, and he's a player of chess, and he said he wanted to experiment. So, I guess he was playing with a computer, and he tried different approaches, and one of them was to kind of just mix both implicit thinking, where he's not really thinking through, we're going with his gut feeling, or explicit thinking, where he's calculating, okay, this many moves ahead. And he tried just using the gut feeling approach to see what would happen. And when he did that, his scores went up. He did better going with his implicit gut feeling thinking, because he had this knowledge that he didn't even know about, which is kind of embodied knowledge, which just comes from thousands of hours of playing chess. Now, it doesn't mean you just totally stop thinking. He needs to have that kind of tension between the two parts of our thinking, the implicit and the explicit thinking. You can't just get rid of the explicit thinking. But having that tension creates an optimal type of knowledge and knowing for playing chess or driving a car, or riding a bicycle. And then so Bella says this, he says, once theoretic culture has come into existence, stories, that's a narrative, can be subjected to criticism. That is at the heart of the axial breakthrough. But in important spheres of life, stories cannot be replaced by theories. So, we can replace stories sometimes with theories, and then specifically, especially in the natural sciences. Like, I mean, we had this story about the making of the Earth and the universe, but we replaced that with theories because now we know a lot more, and then even that's a little bit spotty, but we know about there was a big bang of some sort, and that the universe is expanding, and that the Earth is orbiting around the sun at such and such speed and with these physical properties and made up of these chemicals and compounds and so forth. So we can replace stories with myth in that sense. And yet, even in science, we can't totally get rid of the myth and the story. Where did the universe come from? Can science tell us the answer to that? Can abstract thought tell us the answer to that? And the answer is no. And there's always going to be a mixture, and then really it's going to be philosophy as well as science, that and I guess mythic thinking, which is going to go into the philosophy, I think. At least that's how I would do it. And so yeah, myths and story persist. I mean, where did the universe come from, and where is this all going? Like, does this have an end? Like, what's is there a purpose, or if there is no purpose, what does that mean? Like, those are questions that we need mythic thinking, we need symbolic thinking, we need philosophy to get at. And I'm gonna do a song here from Coldplay, and I need a drink. The air conditioning in this building is a little bit lower today. I'm getting a little bit hot. Normally it's freezing in here. But anyway, and I set the setting here. I hope this sound quality will be okay. But this is a song called The Scientist. So right here for a second. And in The Scientist, we see Chris Martin and the other fellows talking about the scientific thinking and the limits of it. And he's not making the same exact point that I'm making, but anyway, it's similar enough. So let me get the guitar so you can see the guitar here. Back this up. Sorry. Too much stuff around here. Just gotta spread this out. Okay. On a science apart. Nobody said it was easy. It's such a shame for us to part. Nobody said it was easy. No one ever said it would be so hard. Oh, take me back to the start. numbers and figures, pulling the puzzles apart. Sorry. Questions of science, science and progress that do not speak as loud as my heart. Tell me you love me and come back to haunt me. Oh, and I rush through the storm, running in circles, chasing our tails, coming back as we are. Nobody said it was easy. Oh, it's such a shame for us to part. Nobody said it was easy. No one ever said it would be so hard. I'm going back to the start. So the lines there have to do with what? Stay there, guitar. You know, it's saying it's the scientist. Questions of science, science and progress. I was just guessing at numbers and figures, pulling the puzzles apart. Questions of science, science and progress do not speak as loud as my heart. Tell me you love me and come back to haunt me. Oh, when I rush to the start, running in circles, chasing tails, coming back as we are. And it's kind of over analytic thinking. It's like the dog chasing its tail. You're just like, you're trying to get to that truth, but the fact is you're living, so you can't see your back. I mean, you are swimming in it, so you can't totally get out of yourself. So that's part of how mythos and storytelling and ritual helps us to think about these things, because you can't get at them through a totally abstract way of thinking. And yeah, running in circles, coming up tails, heads on a science apart. I'm not sure what that means, but I think it's kind of saying similar to what I'm saying about the limits of abstract and scientific thinking and how we need this mythological thinking. So let's get back to the text, and let me get another swig of my water here. I wish I had a flavored drink. I've been drinking water all day. I'll get some later. But so yeah, Bella. And so the scientist, like Coldplay's scientist, wants, in a certain sense, he doesn't trust, or they don't trust the stories. And they'll say, aha, you've imported unquestioned values and symbols into this intellectual thought process, therefore it's false. I'm better than you because I'm not working with a mythos, not working with a story. I'm just working out purely on science and abstract thought, they think. But I say, so what? You can't even perceive the world without having a mythos first, without symbols and stories. That's how we even can see that there's something there. And I've said this elsewhere, so I'm not going to go into it too much. There's partly it's partly true that we've replaced some stories, some theories, some stories with theories, as I was saying, natural science. But even there, the stories are still there. And it gets even messier and more complex when you get to more complex areas of human life, like ethics and politics and law and human rights. Where are you going to get like the scientific experiment to kind of like give you guidance there, um, without a mythos, without a story, or art? We need symbolic thinking, narrative thinking, together with the precise logic and the experimental data of of the right hemisphere. I'm sorry, of the left hemisphere. Um, and so let's talk about a spectrum of cultures. And I'm going to go to the drawing board here and draw this if I can. And we don't need this other stuff. Let me get this out of the way. I need a bigger studio someday. When I'm rich, I'll have that. But for now, here's my little spectrum of culture. And what do I mean by this? On one side, we have, and this is, by the way, this is cultures. And the mythoi, or the myths that go with those cultures. And over on this side, let's say we have a purely neutral culture that has no vision, no values, it's just neutral. Imagine that. There's no such thing as that, but let's just imagine that for a second. Whereas on the right side, you have the totalitarian culture. Totalitarian. Where everything is spelled out. And whether that's like the film or the novel 1984, where you have Big Brother watching every moment and governing every instance and every thought. And if you don't do that, then you have a thought crime. They even control your thoughts. There's this totalized thing where the vision is imposed from without. And the thing is, with the neutral vision, this will, if you had such a thing, which is not possible, but let's say you had something close to it, this leads to a nihilism, a nothingism. And I'm going to argue that, you know, we're towards that end of the spectrum. So I'm going to place us here. Like, here's modern culture. Here's us. Modern culture, where we are not neutral, but we have a sort of neutral, no vision, and we have this distrust. You know, we're very individualistic, very materialistic, and kind of not scientific, but scientistic, where there's a kind of improper faith in science, like the song is doing. And then, like, over here, let's say close to the totalitarian would be fundamentalists, like super strict fundamentalists. And there's going to be fundamentalists of various stripes. There'll be Christian fundamentalists, there'll be Muslim fundamentalists. There will even be like left fundamentalists who are kind of like the Soviet Union, which is kind of like the 1984 thing, where there's no freedom, and there's thought crimes, and if you think the wrong thing, then you'll be punished. And so, and where should we be? I guess I think we should be in the middle. I mean, that's sort of my sense, and not just because I'm kind of Aristotelian and there's a kind of golden mean, a golden middle, but I think that is, you know, we need some neutrality, and we need some value, and we need this kind of balance between the two parts of our minds, the two parts of our culture, but we're a little bit too far to the neutral vision side, which is bending us and tending us towards this nihilism, which means we're going to have the meaning crisis that we're currently in, and loneliness and depression and so forth. So good. So that's my little chart of cultures. And I want to say a few more things about neurology. And I was listening to Robin Carhart Harris, who's a neurologist at Imperial College London, and he's into psychedelics. Now, I'm not promoting psychedelics. I'm not against psychedelics. But I want to talk about him because I think his work sheds light on this whole issue of the cultures and about how we learn. And so when I'm learning, let's say I'm learning to play chess or something, learning to drive, I'm creating implicit associations and they get ingrained in my psyche. And so I learn how to drive a certain way. But sometimes I learn too strongly and I get too kind of rigid. And then that's going to dominate and skew my thought. And that's an improper story. That's an improper narrative or mythos. And that can lead to like the Soviet Union or like these kind of overbearing type of cultures. So you got to reset the system. And so like one example that Carhart Harris talked about was, let's say, a child of a narcissistic, cruel dad who's cruel and beats them and narcissistic and really focused on himself, doesn't really love his children, or he's having a hard time expressing that. And the kids learn that that's how the masculine is, and then they've got this skewed groove, this kind of canalization of thought based on this bad data that came into them because of the way they were raised by this bad dad. And now it's stuck in their unconscious. And so what happens, you have to unlearn that. You have to kind of erase that, and then learn a more proper type of masculinity. So how does that unlearning and then relearning, recalibrating work? Well, you got to reset. And there's a kind of ritual part of that in all these cultures. One of them is like, kind of like the baptismal death and rebirth, where you kind of reset the system. Or there's the baptism by fire, when there's like a high stress event that leads to this unstructured chaos moment where like all things are open. And that's where we get to the psychedelics, because a psychedelic drug does something similar to the psyche, to the intellect, to the consciousness of the person, where it kind of blows off the structures and the grooves, and it kind of like resets the system, so you're kind of open to like new types of structures and new sets of canalization, like canals, like grooves. And so and one good thing to note here is that the modern scientific way of thinking is kind of like not having any structures, not having any stories or mythos, thinking that that's the truth, that that's like the most objective reality, but that's not. That's impossible. If you had no structures, it's like being on a permanent psychedelic trip where you can't process anything. And that would, you'd end up dying. We need those narratives. We need to kind of reset. We can use the psychedelics or these other kind of rebirth moments. Many times it's through suffering, and so many of these stories. So we're going to look at Aeneas in a second. Story of the Aeneid from Virgil. So many of these stories have that like moment of suffering and then growth out of that suffering. So let's take a quick look at Aeneas to finish this off. And thank you for staying with me this long. Where Aeneas, the founder of Rome, he has to face these very high stress moments, and this is going to lead to his progress and his growth as a leader and his growth as a founder of a new culture, and he's going to found the new Rome out of the ruins of Troy. And he's goes through the stress of being homeless. He has no home. All of a sudden, his home is destroyed, and he's like out on the seas, and he's trying to find his way. He and his men. He's lost his wife. He also has to. He has the loss of a strong erotic tie. Like he loses his wife. Then he's got a chance to marry this woman Dido of Carthage, and there's a strong attraction there, and there's a strong possibility of a nice, comfortable life. But then he's leaving aside his mission, so he has to cut that tie. That's a very difficult, traumatic moment, which leads to growth in his progress, at least in terms of the story. And I mean, we can disagree with whether or not that's a good move. There's the facing of monsters, like Scylla and Charybdis, where there's like a 9-headed monster and there's a whirlpool, and like, how do I get between these two monsters? And I kind of get past them, and he does get past them, he and his men. So through the stress, and so stress can be good. I mean, stress is not good or bad. It's just life. But we need these myths and stories and ritualized myths so that we can figure out how to deal with the monsters and the stresses and the erotic complications that happen to us and progress from them, and not get submerged and destroyed by them, or to end up in a kind of whirlpool of meaning crisis, which we're kind of in. So that's it for today, and we'll keep going.